Hi there. This is the video lecture on the third property of a well-written text. But before we proceed, let's first review the first two. The first property of a well-written text is organization, and it refers to the structural framework of any text. And the three main parts of it are the introduction, body, and conclusion. Aside from that, we also have coherence and cohesion. Coherence referring to the overall understandability of the text. It answers this question: does the text make sense? So, if you can find the main idea in a text, then it makes sense. But if not, then it lacks direction. On the other hand, we have cohesion, which refers to the smooth flow from one sentence to another. Now, we're not just limited to sentences, we also have words and paragraphs. Paragraphs, if you're reading or writing a multi-paragraph essay. In short, if we want to know the cohesion of a text, we have to read it probably more slowly and in detail. To ensure cohesion, we use cohesive devices like transitions and conjunctions. I'll give you the task of reviewing your transitions and conjunctions by revisiting your junior high English lessons or simply Googling them. The third property that we're about to discuss here is more artistic: language use. Let me emphasize that for this lesson, we are studying to use language effectively in conveying our ideas through the written text. It is wise to start with this mindset. We have to be audience-centered in writing. Just like oral communication, style is an important consideration, reflecting the artful theory of communication. To be effective in our use of the language, let's be mindful of these characteristics. Let's be concrete and specific. Second, concise. Third, familiar. Fourth, precise and clear. Fifth, constructive. And lastly, appropriately formal. Concrete and specific. If we want to be effective, we have to let the reader, or rather help the reader imagine what is going on. Let us give form to what we are writing on. Let's be specific, not too general. In this paragraph, let's highlight the words bad roommate, lazy, and discourteous, untidy, and unclean, messes. These words are too general. And what is more, readers can have different associations for each word. Take for instance, bad roommate. A reader can have an image of a person who fails to fix his or her bed upon waking. We can also have an image of a person who never returns your greeting. So see, we have different imageries for just one description: bad roommate. But if you specify what bad roommate is, then your reader will have one unified agreement. And that is, probably based on this text, the bad roommate leaves his dirty dishes on the kitchen counter. But it's still not enough to justify that he is a bad roommate. Because some people who have good attitudes, leave their dishes on the kitchen counter simply because they have other tasks to do. So bad in itself lacks specificity. But take a look at this. Your relationship with John is unacceptable. Instead of problematic, it's unacceptable instead. Look at the pattern that the writer follows. In the first few sentences, we can see that the writer is being general, but as we progress till the last, he or she has become specific to the max. So that is the pattern. General down to the most specific. As you can see, the second example limits the interpretation of the readers. Second characteristic, conciseness. It is a mistaken view to believe that teachers would want to receive wordy outputs. Actually, considering the number of papers that a teacher has to check every day, he or she would rather read shorter works. So it's wise to express your ideas in as few words as possible, because if you write too many words, you are depriving yourself of one important resource for writing: space. And ironically, if you have as few words as possible, you can compress as many ideas as you want, as you need in your text, because you have saved space if you've maintained conciseness. Here's a challenge for you. In the following paragraph, you'll see a verbose form of language. Your job is to shorten these texts. So are you ready? Track down the wordy parts. Which phrases or words do you think should be replaced with or removed? This one too. What the first step to eliminate wordiness is to leave out redundancy, to change jobs and take on new responsibilities, as we saw in the first paragraph, point to the same thought. Aside from that, in the second paragraph, to carefully think about, ponder, and reflect on, point to the same action. So why not decide on a single word to point to that certain idea? Aside from redundant words, let's also refrain from using fillers. Fillers not only take up too much space, they don't also serve any function in your sentence. They are simply put there to reach the quota set by your teacher. When, let's say, your teacher requires you to submit a 500-word essay, and let's say you lack 20 more words, you will be tempted to use fillers to reach the requirement. But that's not wise. It's wiser to think of new ideas to add instead. Instead of writing it in 9 words, like what you see in red ink here, you can actually write it in just 5. Instead of this long, why not write it in this way? You'll save yourself, aside from space, you'll save yourself some ink, which you can use for answering your later exams. Familiarity is the third characteristic. Which words would be the most familiar would depend on the words that your readers encounter almost every day, or regularly, so to speak. Familiarity equals effectiveness. Remember that. You don't need to boast your highfalutin vocabulary. Now, I'll show you another set of paragraphs, and this time your job is to familiarize the not so familiar words. The writer is a philosophy prof, and the audience includes business students. Consider this. What do you think business students study most frequently? Isn't it economics? Can it also be on entrepreneurship and business mathematics? So, how would they excuse me, how would they approach the subject philosophy? Yes, it may be illegitimate, but it's a minor subject. I say illegitimate because as a teacher, I am convinced that students ought to approach each subject as important, regardless of their majority or minority. Now, let's try to identify which expressions are unfamiliar but can be made familiar. Adumbrate, sine qua non. It seems that only philosophy majors and the professor could understand these. These jargons are not regularly encountered by business students, so it would be wise if the professor just used the word present in place of adumbrate and essence instead of sine qua non. The second text, which, according to one class, need not be revised further. If you are convinced that even the grade 7 students of our school would understand this text, then you need not tamper with it. But if you're writing this lesson for grade 3 or grade 1 students, then you have to reconsider. Individuals who maintain a diet of high fat content, for instance, can be simplified or familiarized into individuals who eat too much fat. Precise and clear language. Words can have meaning, many meanings each. That's one problem in writing. And this exercise is an evidence of such conflict. Can you assign a number for each word here? On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, which word implies the greatest intensity of confidence? Most would probably answer certainly, but some may believe that it's probable that sounds more confident than certainly. So when writing, you will have to consider too which word appears too strong or weak to your audience. And depending on the answer, you will have to choose the appropriate one in a way that your audience would not be taken aback too much, nor will they understate the importance of your idea. Because if you use too weak a word for them, then they may not take it with much importance as you give the the idea you are delivering. So the best method is to know which value assignment your audience has for words like these. And you probably assigned a different value than what your seatmate had given. So people are directed by their fields of experiences or frames of reference. Consider the next set of examples. The best way to use these words is to compare them with ideas that are known to the reader. What do we mean by this? Let's say you want to describe something as expensive or inexpensive. Expensive is alone is not that precise and clear, because expensive in what way would be the next question to ask. Like describing Honda as expensive. In itself, it can be expensive or inexpensive depending on the probably the income bracket that the buyer is in. But if you want to be objective, you want to present Honda as objectively expensive on a larger scale, then you can compare it with another brand. Like Honda is more expensive than Kia. And based on my information that Nissan cars have most expensive parts, Honda is inexpensive compared to Nissan cars. Some words also have their own meanings depending on the situation that they're used. Hot in a scientific context would refer to the temperature, but if you want to use it casually, you're referring to the sexual attractiveness of a person. Intelligent. If we're talking physics here, the Albert Einstein archetype would merit this description. But if we're talking about making 3-point shots in the court, we will crown the Michael Jordan archetype with this title, intelligent. Good and bad, especially good and bad, these are morally subjective words. Lastly, beware of the double meanings behind certain headlines. Include your children when baking cookies. You mean to say that you also put your children's hands in the bowl and then you will put them later on in the oven? That sounds absurd. Cannibalistic at that. But if you want to be reasonable, maybe you'd want to indicate that you have your children observe you or watch you when baking. Safety experts say school bus passengers should be belted. You're going to whip these passengers with a belt? That sounds like a violation of human rights. Why not simply say that they ought to wear their seatbelts? Back drive and window blocked by board. Board? You mean the cardboard material? Or the group of directors or trustees? Killer sentenced to die for a second time in 10 years. Is this a fulfillment of the prophecy in the Bible? The resurrection of the dead? No. Killer sentenced twice, maybe, is the meaning. And lastly, eye drops off shelf. Eyeballs falling off a shelf? I think that's not, it's trying to imply. Maybe it points to the liquid used to cure irritated eyes. Eye drops. Imagine that you have to break some bad news to your parents or to anyone. Those messages are in themselves negative, but it's possible to prevent emotional outbursts from your listeners or readers if you make your language constructive. So, being constructive means expressing negative messages positively. The following ideas can make readers feel defensive. Let's first know how to offend people with our words. Superiority over the reader. You can write something like, between you and me, I have more credentials. So that's superiority. Or considering your background, you'll not be able to have some political leverage in our group. The next way to offend someone is to portray indifference or apathy about an issue of importance to the reader. Let me borrow from a scene in 13 Reasons Why, Season 2. Jessica Davis got raped by Bryce. And there was this occasion in which Alex Stendhal publicly revealed Jessica's case by calling Bryce a rapist in front of the other students. And Jessica was there. In that instant, Alex was insensitive, was indifferent, was apathetic towards Jessica's wish that she would never have to reveal her rape case to anyone else. Because it's difficult for rape survivors to let others know about their situation. Now, that's in the context of oral communication, but it's also applicable in writing. So if you're going to bring up an issue, make sure that some readers who are very sensitive to such issue should never pick up your work, or if you want to have them read it, make sure you become constructive. Articulate the case in a way that won't be, that won't sound apathetic or indifferent. Don't just drop the term randomly. Maybe you can, yes, I think euphemism is key here, not to be too direct. Try to find alternative words that will help maintain a healthy relationship between you and your readers. So it's up to your creativity to do it because we have different audience members. Again, we have to be audience centered. Negative evaluation or judgment of the reader as opposed to neutral descriptions or observations. Here, you write something like, "You are noisy," citing your report cards as an example. Assuming that there's a section in your report card where your teachers can write a general overview of your behavior, and you spot you are noisy, you are irresponsible, that would be a negative evaluation or judgment of you already. But if you want to make them neutral, the teacher could write something like, "It seems you have a lot of ideas to share in class every day," in place of noisy, and you tend to miss out on most of your classes, and you also uh, most of the time you also fail to beat deadlines. Now that's neutral in place of irresponsible. Command or control over the reader. When you say command or control over the reader, you tell the reader what to do. And then skepticism or doubt about the reader's credibility or the legitimacy of their claims. Here, you write something like, "Oh, the reader is not believable because he or she did not finish this degree." Or the reader, right? Or the you tell the reader that someone writes in about philosophy, but his or her degree program is not philosophy related. I want you to identify whether the following paragraph is constructive or not. The writer is a student and the audience is a teacher. Tell me if this is constructive. Apparently, it's not. Now, you would want to revise this. So, one technique is to avoid passing judgment on your reader. If this were an email, it could be rewritten like this: "I find it hard to catch up with your lectures, considering that compared to my classmates, I failed to take prerequisite courses or courses that I need in order to pass this class. That's why I am considering dropping out and taking classes next year from Dr. Johnstone, whom I believe, based on experience, can fulfill my learning needs. I don't want to drop out from your class since I also recognize the effectiveness of your instruction. It's just that I need further remedy when it comes to my case. And it seems that, and I don't want to be a burden to your time. So, not unless you're willing to give me consultations every day before class starts so that I can cope with the things that I miss out on during your lectures. So that is one way to converse with your future professors. And the last characteristic of effective language use is formality. We should make formality match the situation and relationship that we have between with the reader. If we're the writer, that is. And it's not necessarily good to be too formal. Like in this paragraph. Okay, I'm presenting to you three versions of the same paragraph. Now, let's start with the most formal. This version can be used when writing a technical report like research. The second version is just formal, and this seems to be appropriate for newspaper articles. This one can be used when writing an article for a medical or health magazine. Now look at the varying levels of formality in the following pairs of words and then judge in which channel they ought to be used. Utilize, use, transpire, happen, facilitate, help, comprehend, understand. If you want to read on, click the link here, just the one below the date of retrieval, and then you can confirm the contents in this PowerPoint. Thank you for watching, and prepare to watch the next set of video lectures focusing on the fourth property of a well-written text called mechanics. See you soon.